Boa noite a todos e todos. É um enorme prazer abrir esse ciclo de palestras da Fundação Getulio Vargas. Meu nome é Eric Klug, eu sou presidente da Japan House São Paulo. A Japan House é uma iniciativa do governo japonês, estabelecida em 2017, que recebe milhões de pessoas para suas exposições. Temos duas no momento, a exposição Daisy Balloon e a exposição da artista japonesa Yuko Mori, e uma infinidade de eventos online e híbridos, incluindo, por exemplo, as nossas exposições virtuais, todas acessíveis no nosso site, eventos como o nosso clube de leitura e as nossas online trip. Então fiquem, por favor, convidados a visitar presencialmente, digitalmente a Japan House e usá-la como uma ponte entre o Brasil e o Japão. Nós investimos muito nos nossos recursos de acessibilidade, tanto física quanto digital, para tornar essa experiência o mais ampla possível e mais prazerosa. Muito obrigado.
Good evening. We are about to start a new round of lectures organized by both the School of International Relations at Fundação Getulio Vargas and the Japan House São Paulo. My name is Luana Geiger, and I'll be hosting tonight's event. Once again, the main goal of this partnership is to promote a space of exchange between researchers in Brazil and Japan, as well as collaborate with the debates on the regional dynamics of East Asia. We're delighted to host Professor Dr. Jimbo from the University of Keio and Professor Dr. Isabela Nogueira de Morais from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. Thank you very much, professors, for kindly accepting our invitation to participate. It is part of our protocol to highlight that all statements expressed during this event only represent personal opinions and not necessarily the institutional position of Fundação Getulio Vargas. Also, all present here agreed to participate and have consented to be recorded on this broadcast, which will be later posted on FGV's official channels. We also thank the audience for joining us. We will be receiving questions during the entire event through the Slido platform, which can be accessed through the link in the event description on YouTube. After these dispositions, we'll have a few minutes to discuss and answer those questions. Without further ado, we will proceed to the lecture of Professor Jimbo and comments from Professor Nogueira. The lecturer of the night is Dr. Jimbo, professor at the Faculty of Policy Management at Keio University in Tokyo. He is currently an adjunct senior research fellow at the Kano Institute for Global Studies and also at the Tokyo Foundation. Dr. Jimbo coordinates the Japan-US Military Statements Forum and has served as special advisor to the Japan Ministry of Defense, as well as senior advisor at the National Security Secretariat of Japan. His policy writings have appeared in publishers such as the Rand Corporation, Pacific Forum, CSIS, Stimson Center, the Japan Times, and Nikkei. Dr. Jimbo, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and from an early morning in Japan. We're looking forward to hearing from you, and the floor is all yours.
Well, thank you very much, Luana, for kindly inviting me to this forum. And I'd like to begin by thanking FGV for kindly hosting this event, and also Embassy of Japan for supporting this, and Dr. Isabela for kindly accepting to become a commentator, discussant for my talk today. And all the viewers, thank you very much for getting in touch with this event. I'm very delighted to offer my view from the other part of the world physically. My only regret is that I couldn't be able to visit Sao Paulo physically, but only after this terrible situation we have been facing for past 18 months could be over. I hope that we can really get in touch by having international travel and the physical, contacts once again, as we had in the pre-COVID situation. So today's topic is to offer my view on the multilateral security and the regionalism in Indo-Pacific. And I prepare my slides. In the next 30 minutes, I will using my slides to offer my initial thoughts on this. So let me try to share. Okay, the the regional framework called the Indo-Pacific has gained a much gravity, so to say, in our regions. And I will going to talk about that the regional concept has been dynamically updated in over past several years in accordance with the importance of political economic transaction in the region. And the concept itself has its own elasticity, which means that it will expand or shrink in accordance to what the region wish to achieve. I will also talk about how the military and security domain, what has been the focal point that we are going to face with in emerging dynamics in the Indo-Pacific region as well. So that for those who haven't really being aware about the concept of the Indo-Pacific, it has been laid out for some time in past several years. And basically, it has been the initiated concept by several major countries, and that involves the Japanese own initiative as well. So whenever it comes to the free and open Indo-Pacific or Indo-Pacific strategy, there are so many versions of the Indo-Pacific. There's not only having a one-fits-all type of the Indo-Pacific, but there has been the Japanese version, the US version, Australian version, Indian, and even that EU and the European member states are now actively being engaged in this concept. I'll come back to this issue later. But one of the, I think, earliest launcher or the initiator of this concept was then Prime Minister Abe, when he visited to Africa at the TICAD 6 conference in Nairobi, Kenya in 2016. It was the first time that Japan has officialized this very concept by saying that the stability and prosperity through the union of two free and open oceans and two continents. And by two oceans, he meant that there will be a much deeper connectivity between Pacific Ocean that we face and also the Indian Ocean. That two vast ocean should be connected through the sea lanes of communication, economic activity, and also the norms that we need to maintain for the safety maritime order. And by two continents, he also meant that it has been the vast Eurasian continents and also the east side of Africa should be economically connected with each other. So this has been one of the the best coverage of the geographical concept that Japan wished to promote. But as I mentioned, there has been the the elasticity of the evolution of the regionalism, which Japan was also being part of in past several decades. And I'd like to mention a few. And I think back in 1980s, when we saw that Asian economic miracle has been more acute, led by the four dragons like Korea, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Singapore, has been the initiator for those East Asian economic miracles, followed by the rise of ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Member States, have also been following those economic rise. And eventually, the rise of China has really created the new symptom of how much those Asia-Pacific economic dynamism has been recognized in the world. And in those processes, what East Asia has achieved is the interconnectivity of the economic dependence, business activities, that is to form the region-wide production, sales, and value networks with each other. So there has been the business-driven, regional cooperation that has been taking place, and the government needed to follow how to, institutionalize the more rule-based and open region framework back in 1980s. And that was the origin of the APEC. That also trigger the new kind of dynamism to forge the political confidence among those governmental members. That was to forge the ASEAN Regional Forum, that is a foreign minister level of meeting, to forge the confidence building measures among those participating states. And that was back in 1980s. In 1990s, we also see the new sets of the regional cooperation took place, and that is a little bit, I think, the smaller cluster of countries that is also to forge the new regionalism in Asia, that is called East Asia. Because back in 1990s, one of the biggest events that we encountered was the Asian financial crisis. So pre-Lehman shock crisis, Asian countries have always remembered how tectonic that the financial crisis that we experienced in 1997 with so-called the double mismatch by the of the financial premature financial system, as well as those excess investments in many those infrastructures and other fields. There has been the fluctuation of the especially on the bond markets and also the short-term supply of those finances in the financial markets that created the region-wide financial crisis. And in dealing with that kind of crisis, Japan, Korea, China have all agreed that we need to have a more tightened framework for the currency swap mechanisms and the rescue package and all issues. That was the formula to organize the ASEAN, that is a 10-country, plus 3, which consists of Japan, Korea, and China collaborated together. So it was a first time in East Asia to that level, at the summit level, that the East Asia was able to organize the regional framework that excludes the United States. And that was, I think, the phenomenal way that there has been the rise of the regional autonomy, that the region can try to self-help for the crisis that they face with each other. So with those kind of platform, that there has been the expanded process of the ASEAN-based international cooperation scheme through so-called the expanded East Asia. This is the one of the what we have, the original form of the East Asian Summit that has been organized in 2005. There's something that has been fascinating was the East Asian Summit tried to invite 3 additional members, that is Australia, New Zealand, and India, and we recognize that there will be the huge economic dynamisms that the regional player has to plug and play. And so that ASEAN plus 3 needs to be expanded to engage actively to those economic dynamism in the region. And 5 years later, with a recognition of the rise of China has been growing so great, so that we have to think about so-called the institutional balancing within the East Asian Summit, without which that the China has become too big. And then we have to invite 2 additional members. Surprisingly, that is the United States and also the Russia. So the United States has been back in the place of the East Asian Summit, so as the Russia, who also wish to pursue its own pivot to Asia strategy to engage more to this region. And so RCEP, regional comprehensive economic partnerships, and those have also been, generated. And now we are now having Indo-Pacific, especially triggered by the major players like Japan and also other countries. And I'll like to touch upon a few. Also, the Indo-Pacific is much a larger concept than the East Asia or expanded East Asia, and it has much to do with the newly rising, emerging powers like India, and also South Asia, Middle East, and also Northern Africa as a part of the new way of engagement through those economic framework. And we also recognize the rise of important coordination among the like-minded states like Japan, United States, Australia, and India to forge the so-called Quad mechanisms. And the Quad has been, pursued for much longer years. But back in 2000s, there has been a certain, amount of the reluctance, especially raised from the Australia and also India, to form such kind of Quad formulation will undermine their interdependent relationship with China. And China obviously has been feel unpleasant about the forging such kind of framework. They feel that more China is encircled by those like-minded states. But now that as China has been growing, much faster and try to, have a more I think influence both in the geostrategic and geo-economic area, and that will continue to force those members in the region to deal with the rise of China. So with having those Indo-Pacific strategy concept on the Japan version, the Tokyo has been focusing on the three key main concepts. The first is to promote and establish the rule of law, freedom, navigation, and free trade. That is more like a normative institutional types that those region has to be led by the rule-based order, especially to focus on the couple of issues that is outlined here. And the second, it's always important that economic prosperity should be associated with the leading concept of the Indo-Pacific. And that will be also be followed by three connectivity: physical connectivity, people-to-people connectivity, and also the institutional connectivity. And I'll show you some slides later. And also the third part is the security domain and the commitment for peace and stability, especially with a particular focus on the capacity building and humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. And you may wonder that where's the United States and where is the role of the alliance and the hardcore military issue. Basically that has been the rules of the game, how we can really maintain the balance of power in the wider Indo-Pacific region. But I think a Japanese version tried to sets the tone that is not too provocative, and those kind of proposal will be accepted by the regional members in order to cultivate the cooperation among those states. Whoever having a nuanced relation with China might be also able to listen to those, I think, proposal. So that was basically the tone we have, established for, in the past few years, and then very fortunately it has had a huge gravity that many players are now joining, be on board on this concept as well. And I think that has its own backgrounds of the macroscope and microscope of the regional backgrounds. And obviously the macroscope was the return of geopolitics back in play, and the rise of China, North Korea missile and nuclear developments, and the reassertive Russia, especially in the eastern, the western front. There is Ukraine issues, Syria, and also Crimea, and all comes to play as the recognition of the assertive Russia for Europe and also for Asia. And we also saw that Saudi, Iran, balance of power issue in the Middle East and the Arabian Peninsula, and those I think have been well recognized why we need to forge the new geographical concepts. And also geopolitical recession, expanding of the geoeconomics is something that I also highlighted, why we have been pushed to force such kind of regional cooperation. And here's a return of geopolitics that I talk about, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. And I think those have been highlighted as a very important geopolitical challenges that many of the regional members face. And when I talk about the geopolitical recession, I think that is the viewing from the other side of the lens, from the US and its allies' perspective, both in the transatlantic relationship through NATO and also trans-Pacific relationship through the bilateral alliances. 15 years ago, I think both alliances are looking more globally because they have to deal with anti-terrorism after 9/11, Afghanistan, Iraq, maritime security, anti-piracy, and those have created the more, I think, wider global platform that everybody needs to collaborate on. But in 2010s, I think you can imagine that both regions are quite busy in dealing with the many issues, assertive Russia, refugee inflows, and terrorism for Europe, and also rise of China, North Korea, opportunistic Russia in Asia. So that alliance look at the more, I think, immediate and the bigger, I think, density of the threats in the region. We need to prioritize our focus on much more on the physical challenges that we face in the region. And finally, the expansion of the geoeconomics, what I call is that there has been the relatively declining engagements by the United States and its like-minded states in the wider Eurasian continents, Middle East, and those kind of vacuum has been filled by the new emerging economies, mainly led by China. And those are mainly led by the economic means, Belt and Road initiatives on the continents, lots of infrastructure funds, and also the maritime engagement that China has been investing has also been changing a lot of, I think, landscape in the Indo-Pacific region. So that those are basically what I saw as a macro scope backgrounds in the Indo-Pacific. And I think there has been lots of, the way how we try to engage in the region through the variety of measures that we have. So the basic policy line that Prime Minister Abe and former Prime Minister Suga have been trying to deal with is to both promote the competitive strategy and also the cooperation strategy in engaging those dynamics. Obviously, the competitive strategy is to maintain the balance of power because the power is dynamically changing. So that status quo management of our territorial defense and the maritime order and how to deal with the hotspots in East Asia, like North Korea, Taiwan, has been quite a big challenge for us. And also that through those, the new digital economy, data-driven economy has been on the rise. The standardization of economic order has also been the pressing issue for Japan and all the region. And also we are pursuing the cooperative strategy, especially with China. Japan-China relationship has been deteriorated since the 2010s over many issues. But at the same time, our business communities are deeply engaged, likewise many other countries in the region, so that we really need to coexist with having the crisis management and also the potential cooperation that we can pursue with each other. So when Prime Minister Abe visited Beijing in 2018, it was a very warm welcome. And both countries have also agreed to collaborate on the so-called third-party market cooperation to engage Indo-Pacific through, co-financing to some of the projects that we jointly face with each other. That will also involve the security and defense cooperation, that always involve the US engagements and how to promote the regional military-to-military relationship, and also maritime capacity building, because ASEAN has its own role to play to manage the maritime order in this region. And then when it comes to the geo-economic outreaches, the free trade and robust quality investment has also been rampant. And that is also through many measures. Sometimes it's bilateral, and sometimes it's regional, and sometimes it's through the economic partnership that we organize to realize in past several years. So I will quickly go through the some of slides that I prepare when I talk about the regional dynamics of the power shift. There are a couple of trends that we need to keep in our mind. When it comes about the GDP projection in the Indo-Pacific region, here we are at the 2021. United States is still the world's biggest economy, but the China is continuously on the rise, and many expects that the China will take over the size of the GDP of the United States. That's a nominal GDP. It's not a PPP. Sometime in the late 2020. And back in 2010, Japan and China was almost like a same GDP power. But now China is much bigger than Japan, and the gap is continuously on the rise. And when we talk about the power transition, in many respects, many talk about the US-China context of the power transition. But when it comes to the Indo-Pacific, we have to pay attention. There are several other power transitions have been taking place among those medium states, and I'd like to zoom in to those status. This is the figure that excludes the United States and China, and zoom in towards the medium power states. So back in the perception of the Tokyo in 2010, Japan was really dominant, vis-a-vis other emerging powers in the Indo-Pacific, but those India, ASEAN has been on the rise, and also in the verge of taking over Japan, and also other players also being shaped as a very important player in this region. So I think Indo-Pacific is not only that China is rising, but also all the other member is also on the rise, and it is a huge opportunity for Japan to, I think, forge a new coalition among the states to create the wider portfolio. How much those kind of cooperation can take a shape, which will change the huge economic opportunity for the future of Japan. So when it comes to the defense and the military, back in 2009, this is the figure how United States is big. And then if all the other countries added up to the defense, all the budgets, the world can merely catch up the size of the United States, which shows that how dominant the U.S. figure has been in the realm of the military spending. But by adapting those kind of, GDP ratio for how much that the country spend on the military, and then to expand those trends to 2030. This is also the concerning trend that we see in coming decades. Well, back in 2005, only 15, 16 years ago, Japanese defense budget and the Chinese military budget was also the same, almost the same size. But now in 2021, China almost spends like 6 times bigger than us, according to those, CPRI data. And also in 2030, China is on the trend of having 10 times bigger defense budget than that of Japan. So it shows how difficult for the regional players to indigenously try to maintain the balance of power, maintain the concept of the maritime and air superiority vis-a-vis China. And then that was also being forged us to have expanded military to military collaboration with the United States primarily, but also with the other countries involved. Again, this is a zoom, zoom in figure for the emerging nations in Asia. Look at India, ASEAN, Korea. They will become one of the major players in the military fields as well. So 20 years ago, it was only a confidence building, as I mentioned. People get together and showing about the recognitions about how we think about security cooperation. But in 2020s and 30s, it is more like a practical military cooperation we need to pursue, because those players are having lots of stake in holding this debate. And this is also the gradational color changes and what kind of percentage that we are dealing with the rise of China. And obviously region as a whole having a very tough relations to maintain the balance of power vis-a-vis China. Here is on the ground and how much that the China build its own fourth generation and fifth generation fighters and modern submarines and destroyers and frigates. Back in early 2000, even the Taiwan can actually maintain the air superiority over Taiwan Straits, because Taiwan had a much more fourth generation fighter than that of China, but it has been overtaken in early 2000s, and now it's been overwhelming not only Taiwan, but also the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force and the US forces in Japan combined. So, this is the rapid, drastic kind of changes that we have on the maintaining of the balance of power. And this is a strategic map, but the United States think tankers, always try to forge. Back in 1990s and early 2000s, if something happened in Korean Peninsula or Taiwan Straits, I think the United States can respond, offer deterrence and response and how to deal with the emerging conflicts in those regions. But what is happening now is that with the Chinese emerging capability, naval and the air forces, and lots of missiles that include the ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and hypersonics, and even the gliders that we saw in the past few days about the news. It has been utilized as a denial capability for the United States to, project its power in the theater. To have a combat inside so-called the first island chain has become a much more costly options. So if something happened in Taiwan Straits, United States has to decide whether they can really project its power at their own higher cost. And then that will pressure the Washingtons to, engage in those kind of crisis and escalation management much more difficult than ever before. So we are having a very huge challenges and how to maintain the status quo at the very high cost that we face. So finally, I would like to mention a few about what's been on the current, political situation and how we are going to manage through the initiatives and the political framework that we are going to have in the coming years. First of all, I think the Indo-Pacific has been providing the major platform for the players to, to join together. The previous Trump administration has decided to adopt this theme, free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, and has also been carried over to the Biden administration. So the geographical concept, we are looking at the similar map, how we can really prioritize our security engagement in the region. That is a good news for the US allies in the region. India has been the pivotal player, and they also engage in the Indo-Pacific as a major diplomatic concepts to promote. And there has been the wider, I think, opportunities of cooperation with India, both on the strategic and economic domain. Australia also engaged recently, so-called the AUKUS, that they have decided to introduce the nuclear power propulsion submarines in the late 2030 to early 2040s, and Australia has also been part of those strategic networks of the underwater security management. We should not forget the important role played by the ASEAN, and as I mentioned earlier, that the ASEAN has been the main player who has been organizing the regional cooperation scheme through the ASEAN way, because ASEAN has been the neutralized player. Whenever Japan, China, Korea try to, initiate the regional cooperation, the regional response should be nuanced, because of the they don't want to be dominated by the one player has its own interest. But ASEAN has been the neutral player who can actually, everybody can really join to utilize the ASEAN platform. So they have been a very important facilitator for the forging the regional cooperation. But now ASEAN has been concerning about the Indo-Pacific can overlook bypass the ASEAN centrality issues. So they are now also rapidly trying to forge its own political role that the ASEAN also has a role to play. So currently, as you're aware, that the situation in Myanmar, encountering the human rights issues at home with the military coup they have, the ASEAN has been trying to engage Myanmar for the peaceful settlement and the peaceful transition to the democracy in the earliest stage. But now they are struggling. They cannot really send the envoys to Myanmar, and the ASEAN is now playing its own leverage by not inviting the current military leaders to the upcoming ASEAN summit for this month. And as I already mentioned about the EU. And I think that the developments on the security and defense will be quite important issues. There has been the US-Japan Plus. It's a bilateral networks, but connecting those other players in the region has been the very important forum. And one of the forum we have is the Quad, as I mentioned, the US, Japan, Australia, India, and the AUKUS, US, Australia, UK. And if that different types of the framework have a more like a meaningful collaboration within each other, you can develop a so-called hands-on cooperation of those different sets of the military-to-military relationship has a role to play in the Asia-Pacific region. Economically speaking, the quality infrastructure projects and expansion of the so-called CPTPP is now a focal point because the CPTPP has lots of stories, and at the Trump administration they have decided to withdraw from it, but Japan, Australia, Canada all get together to organize the CPTPP even without the United States, and waiting for the United States to come back, which is not really likely to happen in the coming years. Meanwhile, that China has filed its own position that they also wish to be a TPP member formally. So we are now in the very, I think, difficult choices how to deal with this framework, and that will completely change the game of the regional framework as well. So here's the final slides, how the the regional players try to engage in the Indo-Pacific concept. It's a lot of things. This is the quotes from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and they have been famous or notorious, or putting all the information all together in the one slides. But you can interpret how much that the regional players have been fostering the lots of agenda in the baskets of the Indo-Pacific, and lots of, I think, initiative has been forged, and as well as the lots of, I think, a scheme has been organized. So this is what I think that the current Indo-Pacific is now getting at, and lots of, I think, rocky scenarios will be moving ahead. But I hope that that will help you understanding what has been taking place in our part of the region, and looking forward to any kinds of questions and discussion to be forged by Dr. Isabela, and also from the audiences. Thank you very much for paying attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Jimbo. Once again, we encourage our audience to send us questions through the Slido platform. And without further ado, I introduce our commentator of the night, Dr. Isabela Nogueira, professor at the Economics Institute and at the Postgraduate Program on International Political Economy, and coordinator at the Lab for Studies on Chinese Political Economy, Lab China. All of these within the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. She has taught and also conducted her postdoc at the University of Geneva, has been visiting professor at the University of Helsinki, Finland, at Tsinghua University in Beijing, and in Maputo, Mozambique. She has been awarded various national and international scholarships in order to conduct her research, among them the Swiss Federal Commission for Scholarship, the Swiss National Science Foundation, and the French Agency for Development. Thank you so much, Professor Nogueira. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to thank the Getulio Vargas Foundation invitation, especially Pedro Brites and Luana, for this opportunity to exchange and to listen and to learn from Professor Jimbo. I also highlight the support from the Japanese embassy, and I sincerely want to praise this real opportunity to exchange views, opinions, and research between professors from different sides of in the world. So it's a wonderful event. It was my pleasure to hear Professor Ken Jimbo. It was an extremely rich and complete presentation, as you have detailed both geoeconomic and geostrategic big issues that are changing right now in the Indo-Pacific, and you have showed how these things are tied together, how economic cooperation is growing in the region and how it could avoid worst scenarios, and also how bilateral and multilateral geostrategic tensions are also growing into the region. So, and you have brilliantly highlighted how radical power shifts or changes are under the way. So thank you. I really learned from your presentation, and actually you give me a hard time to comment after you. But my intention here is, based on your rich presentation, is to make some short considerations about security and defense in the really recent events, really recent changes that are taking place after the pandemics, and actually more precisely after this year, right? After what we call the summer of Xi Jinping for us who have specialized in Chinese studies, and the changes that are going on in Chinese economy and how it has as well changed the dynamics, the defense and geostrategic dynamics of the Indo-Pacific. So I will pretty much focus on what is happening right now and share some of my concerns with you, share some of my views with you, and I would like to hear your comments as well, especially the rising geostrategic tensions in the Indo-Pacific when we analyze the strategies of China and the US for the region, or US-China power transitions or power disputes, right? What I would argue, what I'm going to briefly argue here, I'd like to hear also your comments on this, is that while Washington seems to be investing heavily in its geopolitical ties, Beijing seems to be investing heavily in technological innovation, especially, we just heard about it, like hypersonic weapons, and pretty much tied to its new economic model or its new accumulation pattern or development strategy right now, which is supposed to be turned more and more into innovation-driven economic growth, right? So this thing seems to be highly tied together. And it's also rapidly expanding its military capabilities right in the frontier of what we call now to be part of the fourth industrial revolution, or the big changes that are supposed to be taking place also in more broader geoeconomic terms. So we just got to know now that in August, China tested with success a hypersonic glide vehicle against which the American homeland theoretically has no non-defenses against it. It's the report in the Financial Times. China has secretly tested this nuclear-capable hypersonic missile that orbitated the globe before returning to Earth and then to strike the target, which seems to be a technological development that would overcome US anti-ballistic missile systems that are based in Alaska and set up to shoot down anything that would be coming over the North Pole. That is to say that Chinese system would be able to strike the US from the south. So this episode apparently left the US intelligence official and the Pentagon a little bit stunned, right? According to the media, as it shows that China has made some important progress on development of its own hypersonic weapons. That is to say that while China is frenetic investing in next generation and high-tech RD, suggesting that China is now far more advanced than the US officials previously realized. Right? On the other hand, we also know, and your presentation was quite rich on this point, we also know that the Biden administration, following Trump's administration, is responding aggressively with its so-called integrated deterrency strategy, right, against China, focusing more military cooperation and expanded naval exercises with major regional allies. So only this month we saw at least 3 major exercises between the US and its strategic partners in the Indo-Pacific, right? So that is to say that besides the very controversial AUKUS, right, the so-called Australia, the UK, and the US nuclear submarine deal, that seems to be just the tip of the iceberg, right? That is to say that a lot more is happening in terms of this deep geostrategic cooperation. So in the beginning of October now, the first of these episodes now, in the beginning of October, we saw the joint naval exercises between 2 US carrier strike groups, another one from the UK, along with Japanese big deck warships, followed by Canadian, New Zealand, and the Netherlands Navy, all in the waters of Coast Japan, close to Okinawa, right? A week later, the US started the second phase of the massive Malabar 2021 exercises, which follows, right, which puts together the quadrilateral security dialogue powers of Australia, India, and Japan in the Bay of Bengal. This month's now Quad exercises featured, among others, anti-submarine warfare training, surface gunnery exercises, cross-deck helicopter operations, and a whole host of other exercises aimed at integrating this security forces, especially in the Navy, among the 4 naval powers across the Indian Ocean. And shortly after that, and that's the third episode, the Philippines, which is another well-known US ally, also announced the restoration of the so-called full-scale Balaktan joint exercises with thousands of troops from both sides expected to take part in major war games. So it seems that it's becoming more and more clear that this integrated deterrence from the part of the US is based on this assumption that the US can no longer just rely on its own military strategy alone to prevent China from rising. So, from that I quote Melissa Dalton, which is the acting Assistant Secretary of Defense for Strategy in the US, saying that adversaries are pressing for advantage in multiple domains, and our department requires a different approach, one that requires deeper integration with allies, partners, and other instruments of national power, right? So to summarize, it seems that the US is investing heavily in its geopolitical ties, and on the other hand, that China is investing heavily in its technological innovation, right? I'm a political economist, actually, and not from defense itself, but the importance that this area has gotten in the past years has really shifted our attentions into that. And it really, it seems really strong, and how it seems really clear how Chinese strategy is tied to its innovation and with development strategy in general. So I would like to hear your opinion on that. And also, a very short question for you. I would like to hear your comments on the CPTPP, how you imagine now that it's, well, new proposals on the table coordinated by China, as you presented, as you just finished your presentation talking about that. I was a bit curious to hear about what you expect to be Japan's position on that for now the coming events around this framework. So thank you once again for your great presentation. And I stop here. Thank you.
Luana, can I immediately respond?
Yes, of course.
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Dr. Isabela, for your excellent comment to my presentations, and lots of, I think, point that you covered was very relevant, and I think that also requires the further discussion. First, on the China's tech revolutions, and also their pursuant on how those technologies can also be utilized for the geostrategic means. And I think it's a very, integrated program that the China has been investing upon. And as you mentioned, that one of the huge outcome of the China's tech innovations on the military field has been to focus more on the new technology that involves the space, outer space warfare, cyber technologies, autonomous vehicles, AI, applications on the more like automated kind of C4I system and operational of the war conducts, and also the hypersonics that you also mentioned, and that all I think becomes the huge challenge to the United States, or its own transformation of the military. So the previous idea was that the legacy fields United States has been facing with so-called the anti-access area denial capability of China, so that in order to overcome those legacy domains, the United States employed the multi-domain warfare to offset the Chinese capability. But as you mentioned, that who is offsetting whom is the question, because China is also gaining much advanced technologies in the military field in order to, I think, even advance their capability in the new domain as well. And you pointed out the hypersonic glide vehicles, which is also a huge shock to all of those strategic community, both in Japan and the United States. But I guess that sooner or later, China has been on the rise of verifying their own capability to strike United States with nuclear weapons. They are now cultivating more ICBMs to be placed under the soil, in the soil of China. They're also developing the submarine-launched ballistic missiles called the JL-3, which also extend the range of its the delivery, so that they can actually advance its own nuclear submarines in somewhere like a South China Sea, and the JLC is able to launch the missiles from there. And then the hypersonics, so that there's a new kind of triad style without having, the long-range strategic bombs that China is forging to verify that they do have a more confidence in their own second strike capability vis-a-vis United States. And with having a more arsenals, they can also develop their nuclear strategy into the flexible use of the first strike as well, theoretically. So this is the, I think, a new issue that the United States has to face. With having those kind of Chinese verified capability, it's a matter of time that when the United States finally admit that they are vulnerable to Chinese nuclear attack, I think, recognize the mutual vulnerability issue is now at the table. Likewise, they had with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. So that makes a lot of concern for the regional partners, because now United States declare that they are vulnerable to Chinese nuclear attacks, that theoretically speaking, that it will give China a more free hand in conducting the regional theater level of operations without many confidence, because the United States are not easy to intervene any longer with the Chinese capability of the nuclear strike against the United States. So it is a huge tool for the wedging strategy between United States and its allies in the region. Secondly, you also mentioned about integrated deterrence and developments of those collaboration with regional players, beyond the regional players, because that's involved the UK, Netherlands, and other players. And I think you highlighted quite well that United States has been efficiently tried to organize the series of different sets of the exercises all together in the coordinated format used. Began with the US-Japan bilateral, and then to invite the UK, Queen Elizabeth, and also all the aircraft carrier all together to operate in the northern part of the South China Sea, joining in the Malabar, and also to forge the exercise with the Philippines. So I believe that the United States is now in the process of having a global posture review of the US forces. It certainly tried to enshrine what you mentioned about the integrated deterrence, that the United States tried to forge the alliance and partnership in the region to having a more like a collective notion of how they can really maintain the deterrence vis-a-vis China. So I think those kind of coordination is a very much important feature of what we are having in this region. Although we have lots of capability questions like what NATO have, all the capabilities are different. The country who can force the power projections beyond the near sea is very much limited. For the case of Philippines, they are having a presidential election next year, and we don't know how the psyche, that political kind of affirmativeness on the U.S. Philippine alliance, because they're having a very difficult time during the Duterte administration, how they can really forge the alliance. So it is not the one-fits-all type of the kind of magnetic kind of coalition that we have. We are having a very sensitive, nuanced cooperation among those regional players when it comes to those integrated deterrence issues. Finally, you also raised a very tough question on the CPTPP. It was Japan who also initiated the CPTPP without the United States, and I thought it was a very strategic decision because you can say that TPP is dead, but I think TPP standards have been carried over and need to be institutionalized as a form of the CPTPP. And I think whoever study the CPTPP, I think everybody recognized that it is not only about the reduction of the tariffs, and it is about the standardization of the business practices and rules and norms of the economic order that is take place. So I think Japan has been putting a high premium on this part. It is those types of the rule-based economic order should lead the process of the wider regional cooperation. So wish that there will be a positive kind of impact that be played out in the connectivity between CPTPP and also the RCEP, which China is also being part of it, and the pushing RCEP to be a more like a high quality economic partnership cooperation in the coming years. And now that China is playing its own card that they wish to be part of the TPP. And I think we have been somewhat puzzled by how we can really respond to the Chinese proposal. Some of the conservative members and the political members that no, that China cannot be part of it because this is the countering China framework that we need to differentiate from what China is trying to perform in the economic domain vis-a-vis what kind of economic standard we wish to forge in the region. So it's not the totally open-ended regional framework. And I think a competition strategy is one of the main, trends of how we see the TPP. So it's no question about, how we deal with China, but I think the Chinese proposal should be widely neglected. That's the one response we have. The second response we have is that why don't let China to forge its own reform while they are, proposing to be part of the TPP, because many of the agenda that the United States has been arguing against China, including the problem associated with the state-owned enterprises, the huge subsidies to there, and the Chinese business practices, the CCP kind of involvements in the business activities, politically led kind of licensing, issues and joint venture status. And so on. Those are the issue. It directly deal with how they can really deal with the CPTPP. Vietnam, to become a member, they have been having thousands of reforms in the domestic law to become a TPP member. And I think if that same kind of pressure may happen to China, that will be a main driver to become the leverage for the TPP members to asking China to reform itself. So I think it might be tactically wiser that to accept the Chinese proposal to be under consideration among the old members of the TPP. Meanwhile, that we are asking the China to meet with conditions to become the TPP members. So that might be the one. But second, what if the China really accepted to become the TPP member, before UK or United States, join the TPP? Everybody now thinks that the China can become a veto power on the TPP because the TPP decision making is a consensus. So everybody who raised the no, I think that will decide a whole TPP decision making. They can deny the future U.S. participation towards the TPP. And looking at the size of the economy, once again, the TPP can be a very unbalanced kind of economic distribution schemes to forge in the region. And finally, that lots of kind of forward-looking agendas of the TPP and standards could be diluted by the Chinese initiatives. And those are the concerns that we have for the TPP. So the TPP is now becoming a very sensitive dynamics that we carefully need to handle. My personal opinion is that I think, let China to play its own role in the TPP proposal, while the TPP members should not make any major concessions about the conditions for China to become the TPP members. Those are my preliminary thoughts on your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nogueira and Dr. Jimbo. We have a little bit of time left to take a couple of questions from the audience. And to save us some time, I have merged a few of them into the following. Professor Jimbo. Prime Minister Kishida Fumio called for increases in Japan's military capability and spending recently. How do you think this will be perceived in the region? Do you think that the new Prime Minister will follow a more proactive Japanese foreign and security policy? And finally, do you see FOIP as an alternative, a competitor, or a complement to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative?
Thank you. That's also an excellent question. Now we have a new Prime Minister after resignation of the Prime Minister Suga. He faced with lots of domestic difficulties over dealing with the COVID situation. Now we had a fifth rounds of the outbreak during summer, coincident with Tokyo Olympics, and very glad that the Brazilian team, joined the Olympics. And but I think that gave a huge blow to the governance of Japan in August-September timeframe, and Suga decided to step down from the Prime Minister's office. And the Kishida has been elected as a new leader, and one of the safest way to say is that there will be a more continuity than the changes because he is from the same party, although from the more like a liberal factions. but led by the lots of cabinet members who actually has a hawkish view on many issues. So that current Liberal Democratic Party, the ruling party of Japan, is the composition of the mixture of the many ideological thoughts and lots of like different ideas have been competed within the ruling party. This is one of the reasons why that the opposition party cannot really take over the LDP. But Kishida has to take into account of a couple of issues. First of all, he mentioned about, as a questioner has mentioned, that forging the strong security military policies that involves our investments on the defense spending. Some cabinet member leaders mentioned about Japan should aim for 2% of its GDP. The long-standing Japanese defense budget ratio is 1% of the GDP. And that has recently been heavily criticized by the lead, some of the senior diplomats from the Trump administration, because Trump was quite a unique figure that he not only tried to compete with China, but he tried to compete within the alliance system. So they have pressure very much on the NATO alliance members and Korea, Japan to spend more money on the defense. But this is understandable, according to those integrated defense. It is not only that the United States will try to offer the security guarantees to the region in a more dynamic way, but forging those allies in partnership to, I think, cultivate its own capabilities and the roles in the region. And only then that integrated deterrence may matter. And the NATO has set the rules that they have to aim for every participating nation to spend more than like 2% of the GDP. And if you apply those to the Trans-Pacific relationship, Japan has also been viewed that there has been underspending on its own defense to be a responsible partner of the United States. So this has been pressuring Japan that we have to spend more on defense. And in dealing with the indigenous balance of power issue vis-a-vis China, obviously that we have to spend more money. But given that the physical challenges that we have, we always, during the COVID, we spend trillions of yens on the dealing with the medicals, subsidies, economic boosting, and those that only deteriorated the fiscal challenges as of today. So that Ministry of Finance has been quite reluctant to encourage the defense spending and those kind of pressure from the society that you should spend more on the other fields other than the defense has also been the case. So from the strategic point of view, obviously Japan has been on the verge of spending more money on the defense, but domestically spending, you can find how difficult it is to allocate those budgets to the defense field. So that I think it's really up to the political decision by the Prime Minister Kishida how serious he is in forging the defense spending itself. On the case of the BRI, what could be the alternatives? And I think when it look at the reports of the Asian Development Bank, OECD, World Bank, they all mention that there has been the accumulated enormous amount of demands for the infrastructure developments in the decades to come, and the existing scheme for the financing cannot really meet with the demands. So there will be a more kind of demand-based approaches that the infrastructure finance and engagements will be needed. In that context, Japanese bilateral engagement, business engagements, and also by BRI, Chinese initiative, have been a good news for the region, basically, increased kind of investments for the future demands of the infrastructures. And secondly, there have been the opportunity for cooperation, not only having a competing, status in every project that we see in the South Asia, Middle East, and Africa, but those, schemes can be collaborated further if we think that those kind of, the demands for financing can be available. So in the past few years, the ADB, that's based in Philippines and Asian Development Banks, and also AIIB, that is the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which led by China, but with the multilateral board meetings there. They have been jointly financing to the several projects in India, Pakistan, and Iran and other places to forge some of the examples that the Chinese initiatives and the other countries' initiative can merge together in several areas. But at the same time, that creates a lot of other issues because BRI has been notorious of the over-financing issues in the Sri Lanka, Pakistan. There have been the accumulated debts that the project cannot really be financed in a responsible manner. So that will be the over-reliance over the Chinese political kind of interest associated with those projects because of those debt accumulated situation in some of those BRI acceptance countries and areas. And secondly, that China obviously wished to promote its own ecosystems in those BRI nations. So that is not only associated with the infrastructure itself, but its own Chinese projects and the Chinese business models and the digital infrastructure that involves the Alibaba, Tencents, and how those kind of schemes could be also being spread in those areas. And with having a different standards of how those business practices and data governance can be applied to those regions, that also involves the kind of competition status over what kind of economic standards to be applied in those emerging regions in the Indo-Pacific. So I guess that we are still in the competing processes, what kind of order could be emerged. And that's not only with the kind of the simple collaboration over the infrastructures, but we have to envision what kind of economic systems to be prevailed in the areas of the Indo-Pacific region.
Thank you, Professor. As we approach the end of this webinar, we thank very much both professors for the enriching lecture and debate, as well as the Japan House for supporting the lectures. On October 28th, both professors are coming back, and it will be a pleasure to host a lecture from Professor Nogueira and then comments from Professor Jimbo. Thank you very much, and we wish all a great night.